Hello and welcome to Writing Craft World Building Hard versus Soft. My name is Shari. I write as S and Arlie, and I will be our moderator for this panel. And I am going to have our panelists introduce themselves. And since we are all writers, I want you to introduce yourself and tell us whether you favor hard world building or soft world building. And we'll go in alphabetical order because I can't like point. You can't see. No, normally I would gesture to you on the table. Would you like to go? And I can't do that. So we'll go alphabetical just because.
Oh my
Okay.
gosh, I've got an S before the T. Oh, that doesn't happen too often. I'm Catherine Sullivan. I write adult fantasy and science fiction. Show the book covers, short story collection,
Pretty.
adult fantasy, mini books. Um, but I'm a pantser, so although I will do a lot of research ahead of time, I will basically have the facts there. Um, I'm trying the work in progress. I've got it's going to be more of a hard science fiction, middle grade hard science fiction, which means I've got all these facts stored up, and I'm trying not to be an info dump. I'm trying to just put them here and there where they flow naturally in the story. What's slowing me is I'm not sure if I'm doing that right or if it's just basically here's another whole bunch of facts. Here's another facts. And I'm trying not to do that. So I'm still doing the pantser version rather than so you can't get me to do an outline because then I think I've got the story done and not
Uh,
working anymore.
outlines don't work for everyone. All right, Tyler, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, I write novels mostly at this point. Steampunk, urban fantasy, some science fiction. I have these two that are already out. If I can hold them so the light doesn't reflect.
Yes, that's a good angle.
The Deep End is a steampunk mystery, intrigue, metaphysical thing with stabby poison things, and the Deep End is based on classic movie monsters, sort of, and it's set in 1905 San Francisco, and so uh, those both involved a considerable amount of world building, and it's kind of a fun thing to do. Some of it, writing the book is an excuse for doing the research, and like Catherine, I tend to immerse myself in it insofar as it needs immersing. If there's something to do, like the 1905 stuff, I was reading newspapers and diaries from the time and place um, to sort of prepare myself. But then I make stuff up as I go along as I need it, and just I because I believe in productivity over huge attention to detail, and so the things get the attention, but they get them just when they need it, because otherwise I'm doing lots of work that doesn't contribute, I feel.
Excellent. Fair.
I always had the writer who does the I've done all this hard work and now you have to suffer for it.
Yes, you must suffer for my hard work. So, again, I write as S and Arlie, and I write primarily the Glare issue, young adult fantasy, and I actually have a reading that's posted for earlier today that you could go listen to me read chapters 5 through 7 um, of one of my young adult novellas. And I am very firmly a soft world building writer. And I did not know that that was a thing until some point during the pandemic, actually. I had not heard the phrase, soft world building. And once I discovered it, I thought, well, this is a really cool thing. And we should talk about it a little more. We've all heard about um, hard and soft science fiction, where it's not necessarily that hard science fiction is better. It's just that it's the goal is to feel more scientifically accurate. And soft science fiction, the science part isn't as critical to the function of the story. And you have same with fantasy. You have hard and soft fantasy. Um, and so hard and soft world building. So, since this may be a new concept for some people, we're going to talk a little bit about, come up with some definitions that we can work with here. So, at its core, what do you consider world building to be? Just world building in general, ignoring hard and soft for right now. What is world building?
I always tend to go back with Patricia Weirdy's rules of world building, where you're constructing your society. What's the manners? What's the swear words? How is the gods? How are the currency? How your city's located? But I don't. I've always started just with the character and going from there, and what
Huh?
makes them tick. So
Yeah, I like to start with something that's known or somewhat familiar, and then add cool stuff. And if it's cool stuff that I can use, that'll actually
Add
drive the
cool
story,
stuff.
then so much the better. But I also believe in just having cool stuff to have cool stuff, because that's what readers are here for. They want to be transported to a strange and wonderful place. And so I try to bring the stuff in at the point where it's relevant to the story, but there's also background going on, and I'm thinking about what's happening here, and how is it going to become evident as the people move through the world. So I might have somewhat lost track of the question, but
Just identifying what building is. I
yeah.
love your take something and add cool stuff to it. I'm teaching some Girl Scouts how to do screenwriting tomorrow
Hmm.
after the convention, and I'm going to bring that up. You take your place and add cool stuff. I love that. That's excellent.
Yeah, that um, I forgot what I was going to say. That Yeah, keep going.
Okay,
I'll come
so
back to it.
I consider world building to be all of the components of the world that you choose to include on the screen or in the story to explain the world and how it works. It can establish your atmosphere, your tone, your mood. It sets up the politics and the social norms. Um, and The difference between hard and soft world building is, how you approach those things. Excuse me, I have to cough and I don't want to cough in your ear. All right. Um, so hard world building. What do you what how would you define hard world building? What are its characteristics, would you say?
It
I don't know. Are you talking more
it
about the
sounds
architecture?
like we're talking about hard world building as being thorough in advance world building, that
Mhm.
you're rigorously looking for inconsistencies and trying to, root them out and figure out what all is going on where, and how long the orbital period of the planet is, and what's the actual effect if there are three moons and things like this. Um, and thinking about the economy, how things work, um, making up languages. You cited Lord of the Rings as an
Mhm.
example. This is an example of way too much world building, having gone into this process at the beginning. Um, Sounded like a whole heck of a lot of work. He would have written more books if he didn't go quite into so much detail. But
He was establishing the language first, so
yeah, yeah. But that's how I see it. It's world building for the joy of world building, and getting it right. And soft world building is world building for the purpose of getting a story out. Is the way that I look at it.
Okay. Kathy, do you have
yeah, basically the same thing. So again, I tend to start off with the characters because every time I try to construct a whole world, I feel like I spend too much time on that and not enough time on the story.
Right,
Yep.
because you have to change it anyway
Yeah,
once you get into the story, because you need the world to be organized in such a way that it will drive the story that you want to tell.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so, you come up with your characters. How is the story going to change them? What are they going to do? Well, what's going to force them to do that?
Mhm.
And the world is going to, the whatever's happening around them is going to.
Mhm.
And so why do the rework?
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially when the
Um,
characters decide they're not going to work with you anymore and walk off. It's like, no, that didn't work.
um, so the idea for this panel came from a video that I watched on YouTube about hard and soft world building. So I believe the link for that is somewhere in the comments on this video. So if you want to go nab that, great. If you forget to grab it now and it's gone later, you can find me on Discord and tomorrow and let me know and I can send it to you. But uh, the uh, the hmm, the definition that uh, the author in this video gave for defining hard world building did involve a lot of that building your world in advance and at least knowing it, even if it doesn't show up in your work, how things work there. And so it prioritizes logic and immerses the reader in a world that's realistic and as believable as possible. So you've got realistic, detailed cultures and sometimes languages, and it's clear how they work together or don't work together, and essentially grounded in realism. Um, and while uh, Tolkien is held up as kind of the uh, biggest hard world builder on the planet because he is, there are other very good hard world builders out there. Um, I consider Catherine Kurtz's Darany series is has a
Yeah,
very hard.
that's pretty
Pardon?
thorough.
Yeah, it's a pretty hard world build where it's it's very clear. Everything feels, it has that feeling of reality, even though you're in a fantasy world.
Mm.
Um, Kelly McCullough loves to build worlds. That's where he starts with his stories. I always start with character. He always starts with the world. And so he knows much, much more about the world than what shows up in the story. Um, and then a lot of Garth Nix's work is, you know, very clearly laid out and feels realistic. Can you, either of you, think of other people who you can think of as having, this priority on logic and immersing the reader in a world that is realistic and believable?
I think that Lois McMaster Bujold
Yeah.
pays a lot of attention to the details of the environments she's writing in, and makes up a lot of politics and details about the environment. I mean, if you um, trying to remember the name, somebody in the Red Queen
Oh, um, anyhow,
starts with a J.
yeah,
Anyway, and there's a lot about the planetary environment there, and the bugs that you must not slap because they will burn you, and I'm sure she had a blast making all that stuff up. But there are a lot of details like that, and so that's one. Um,
C. Cherry,
yeah,
Yes.
uh, especially with the Foreigner series,
yeah, yeah.
because you've got the politics as well as the technology
Cherry is
and
uh, I think good at that in a lot of ways. In the fantasy realm, um, Little Big, who is that?
Little Big.
Is the title of the book.
mhm.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that one.
Well, it's a good one. Looking it up.
I do
Anyway,
not know.
Drowned Crowley.
Okay.
Um, and The Last Unicorn has a very
Version.
fully realized
Hmm.
environment. It's really very very immersive, and you're
Hmm.
not in this world.
Kathy,
Um,
can you think of any others to add to our examples of hard world building with that feeling of being in reality?
Well, Murderbot Diaries. That has just, she doesn't go into great detail, but you feel like you know exactly how those different space stations and planets are set up.
Uh,
Um, that was Marshall Wells.
Titus
Um,
Grown, the Gormenghast is such a character in the story. It's a total sense of place that all of this environment has been built in the weird, wretched stories taking place inside of it.
weird, wretched story. All right. So to contrast, how do you define soft world building and what are its characteristics?
you don't get a lot of descriptions. I just basically get the feel for the characters more than anything else on those. But trying to pull up an example right now because
See, I think if it's well done,
mhm,
you don't you still get the immersive
yeah,
feeling for the world. It's just if it's poorly done, then it seems derivative because they've just borrowed a setting off of someone else, and or off of the real world, and there's a few things thrown in, but they don't carry through.
mhm,
So I think that that logic and that consistency is still important. It's just when you apply it, because you can always go back using the magical uh, time altering power of the author
of
and
telepathy.
and and fix things that were inconsistent before. And that's more work than if you knew it up front, but on the other hand, knowing it up front is a lot more work. And so it's when you do it, basically you still have to do it if you want to produce a quality product.
Hmm. So uh, there's actually a little bit more to soft world building than just that. So soft world building focuses it's atmospheric, prioritizing emotion and the sense of profound rather than logic. So this is where you can look at a story and say, okay, this feels like a soft world build versus a hard world build. It immerses the reader in the unknown with flexible rules, and leaves a lot more to the reader's imagination and doesn't explain things quite as much, expecting the reader to connect the dots and figure out how things are working. Um,
So Wizard of the Pigeons, Tea with the Black Dragon. Um,
Some of T. Kingfisher's books, Sword Heart, Paladin's Grace, Paladin's Strength, but she focuses on some particular focus. Like one character is perfumer, so we got a lot of detail on perfuming, but you just get a feel for a general feel of the world around.
Yeah. And, you'll get description of, the spaces that you're in, but a lot of times you're not going to get the justifications that you'll get when people are trying to create a world that feels real.
Mhm.
You're not going to get an explanation or justification for why this person has this title or this power or what the rules are. You're not told the rules or the laws. Um, uh, when you make magic using a soft world build, you aren't going to be following rules
Mhm.
entirely, or you're not going to make those rules clear to people. You might internally know what the rules are, but you're not telling the audience entirely what those rules are. Um,
I don't
and you
think that
might
I don't think that just applies to fantasy, though. I mean,
no,
look at
no,
Star Wars, for instance. How does their faster than light drive work? It goes fast.
yes, that's the hand waving,
Yeah,
Mhm.
that.
it was
But
then when he trying to go into the details, the whole story just fell apart. And I was like, oh,
yeah. You generally don't learn more than the character that you're following knows, and it's almost more like you're a step removed. You're watching the character and you don't have someone to translate the culture. So you don't know what the laws are and the rules. Um, so, da, 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 da. So the model is creating your world not necessarily entirely bound by logic, that naturally flows as the story develops, um, with things that aren't. So instead of having a realistic described depth, where you're seeing the culture, you're seeing the variation in the people and the language, it has more of an imagined depth. Things are hinted at, but never described or mentioned. So it allows the reader to create those. Some examples of some other examples of soft world building. So some of the Oz books,
Mhm.
particularly the later ones. I can't remember about the first one because it's been so long since I read it. Um, Robin McKinley's, particularly her fairy tale books, Spindle's
Mhm.
End, Beauty, Deerskin, and Sunshine. You know, we're following the characters, but we're not getting the specifics of how the magic works and how, what's happening.
With
And,
Forgotten Beats of Eld, you didn't get a whole description, just the fact that she was looking for all these names of beasts.
yep. Terry Pratchett um, is Discworld, his Discworld books. There's a lot of, kind of absurd and very weird things in there that we just buy because Discworld is weird and Discworld has these things, and we don't need to know, how does Lord Vetinari have all that power and why and what is he doing, and so all right. Um, so let's talk a little bit. Or are there any other examples of soft world building that you want to share?
I think H.P. Lovecraft would qualify.
Oh, yeah, H.P. Lovecraft actually would.
Very much more about the feeling
Yep.
than about making sense. Yeah.
And if using a movie helps, Studio Ghibli films, Spirited Away is a really nice example. Although most Studio Ghibli films, they don't explain the magic and what's going on. You
When
just
they
kind
tried to explain it on Howl's Moving Castle, it just veered so differently from the books. Like,
I
of.
think I think some of what comes across to us as soft world building might be taking advantage of some cultural expectations that the people that it was intended for will know about, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, that's how that works. I've heard the story about that."
Yeah, yeah. But so like if you look at Spirited Away, there's this girl and she's ended up in this, bathhouse with where thousands of spirits come every night, and
Mhm.
it's like, where did they come from? Why, how do they get here? I mean, we see some coming from a boat, but is this all the spirits in the world? Where are they all coming from? And the power structure within the bathhouse, it's not clearly explained, because then it wouldn't feel like, it wouldn't have the feeling that it does, where you're inside the perspective of this 10-year-old girl who's lost and scared and does not understand what's going on.
I mean, The Cat Returns.
Oh
That
god, I love The
felt like
Cat
a whole
Returns.
other story that I was missing, but it was so wonderful to watch.
It is so absurd. The Cat Returns is full of absurd. If you haven't seen it, it's a good mood lifter. There are certain parts that I can't not laugh at. Um, and so that one really does embrace, it's like, where did, wow, I was not seeing that coming. I'm
Yes.
gonna toss these cats out the window. Okay now. So yeah, that one really, really embraces the soft world building, in that there's a lot that's just left for the reader to, or the viewer to part,
I looked
parse
that
out.
up. That looks like it could be interesting.
It's delightful.
Oh,
It's really ridiculous. So we talked a little bit about your approach. Why does your approach work for you?
We know it doesn't always work for me.
Well, okay, but what about your approach do you feel works best for you,
I,
as opposed to trying something different?
I think that I lack the patience for doing all that work in advance without the reward of making progress in the story. You
Mm.
know, I try and make outlines too, and it's just not my thing. I get to like three-quarters of a page of outline, and I know I've got I maybe like half to two-thirds of the way through the outline. Then I say, okay, I got to start writing it now.
mhm.
and the outline goes out the window. I mean, I've thought about the story. I need to get rolling. That's just how I motivate myself because that's
Yeah.
the fun part.
I
Uh,
may know how mine will end, and I may know what happens in the middle, but
yeah,
I need
I
to know
generally know
something.
how mine will end, but I'm not always right.
Yeah.
Um, the the other thing is, of course, that sometimes I it leads me to not do enough work in advance, and there's a book that I uh, am working on right now that's number two in a series, and of course you're stuck if number one is already out because you can't go back and fix it if you haven't thought something through. It's too late. Fortunately, number one is not out in this case
Ah,
because in book one we're meeting some mole men who've come to Earth, and they have an underground kingdom, and so they share some information about what's going on. And one of the things they're doing is figuring out what they're going to bring back home because they want to have trade goods. And so I'm thinking, okay, now what will the mole people want? And because Earth had the fun technology, they were getting like handheld sort of scamps, and so they weren't worrying too much about what was going to happen when the batteries ran out because they would be somewhere else by then. But then on book two, when we are in the Mole Man Kingdom, I'm having to make up a lot more details than
ah,
before. And so I'm thinking about things like, okay, here is the queen of the mole people, and what is her regalia going to look like? What do they find valuable? Because they've got tons of gems and gold and shit. So, what do you wear as the queen to signify your status? You wear wood because they've got
ah,
very, very little of it. And
yeah.
here are the mole people back on Earth, and they're in a forest and they're sitting on a tree, and they say, wait, is this wood we're sitting on, this huge thing? Let's bring some of that home.
Let's bring that home.
So
Yeah.
fortunately, I'm still revising book one, so I'm getting that in. So stuff like that. But yeah, you want to do enough work to not have to uh, do extensive rework.
Yep. So
If
Kathy, how
if
do
doing too much work, I basically will start to get bored with it because and if I try to outline it, if I feel that I've already written the story, okay, move on to another one.
mhm.
Just wasted all that work.
And I think it's important to mention on panels like this that there is no one right way to write your work. Where our brains work differently. Some people have to have a very detailed outline. Some people just need a vague roadmap. I'm kind of in vague roadmap land with longer pieces because plot was historically a tough thing for me when I was first writing. Short stories, I don't need any kind of outline. I just need a starting point and I figure out what my end point is and then I go there. How do I get to the end point? Um, but I need to have some signposts so that they're more, guidelines than a you must follow this path um, to make sure that I don't bury the plot and that I have a plot. Because I had a couple of early books that, well, we're pretty sure there's a plot here, but it's buried somewhere. So, I think
Mhm.
it's
Something
important.
happens and something else happens.
There were things happening, um, but I
Until
think
the characters give up and walk away on me. It's like, wait, wait, what?
no, come back.
I'll
And
change it.
and the same is true for how you're going to build your world, how you're going to develop your characters. You find what works with your brain and how, for you. Um, and it's really nice that there are so many different ways to do things because there's going to be something that works for everybody. Um, so even with my soft world building, there's still things that I do have to research. My latest two books take place in Paris, which is a place I have never been. And so I did spend some quality time, looking on Google Maps and, virtually visiting places. And this was even before the pandemic. So I was like virtually visiting places before it was cool. I really like Street View
Consider.
because I could, walk around in Paris to find the places that where I wanted things to happen. Um, And it wasn't that, I didn't find, places that existed in real world Paris. It's just that I didn't give you all of Paris to see. I only gave you the pieces that we were present in. You only get those descriptions.
Mhm.
Um, so I did still have to do some research, and I do find that terribly fun, but I also find it um, fraught with danger because sometimes, it's going down the rabbit hole can be a good fun experience, but it can also be a time waster. Since you have to be able to recognize, am I procrastinating? Am I being creative and finding new things? Because you want to give your brain some new stuff to play with,
Mhm.
but um, I could I can waste too much time that way. All right, so what are some advantages of that you see in hard world building? That grounded in reality kind of.
Well, sometimes you can come up with, sometimes when you're doing the research, something cool will come up. It's like, yes, I've got to add this to the story. I'll figure out a way to make it work somehow. Uh, and sometimes that will just take your story in a whole different direction than you previously thought, which is fun. Um,
How about this? If your work is wildly successful, then it gives your literary executors something to publish after your death to to satisfy your fans who want more. All your world building notes.
Ah, yes.
uh, uh,
Christopher and his many, many.
Mine would be very disappointing.
Tyler, do you have any thoughts beyond that on
Well, it's
what
like I said before,
are?
preventing rework.
Mhm.
I think you've got a better chance of getting a deeply convincing setting if you've really thought all these things through in advance. And I want to get a deeply convincing setting, but I don't want to have to do all the work in advance.
Mhm.
There's you need what I try to do is have the basics and kind of a penumbra around the direction that I'm going so that I'm making up enough stuff that there are opportunities that come in.
Mhm.
And so trying to get the best of both worlds,
Yep.
basically.
Um, I think that it's easier to get that willing suspension of disbelief, and if things are explained in a way that you've got the justifications there for why things are happening, and it's like, oh yes, I totally buy that. And I think that realism can be easy to relate to. It's clear. You're not lost. You're, in a story where you know what's going on,
mhm.
and you're following the story, not trying to figure something out.
Right.
So what do you see as disadvantages of hard world building?
Besides all the hard work.
Well, there's the advanced setup, yes.
Mhm.
uh,
Yeah,
Getting the story because you've been throwing so many details in.
Mm, yeah,
yeah,
the info dumps.
Yeah.
yeah, that's a danger. And also, there's the matter of producing more than one book every 5 years is
Mhm.
important. Um, but unless it's what you want to do, if the world building is where the passion is for you,
Mhm.
then maybe that's more important than producing a lot of pages.
Mhm.
Um,
Um, I think sometimes, and this was something that was difficult for me when I was in a writers group with people who were hard world builders, and we didn't have this language to identify, why mine was different. I was constantly having to go back and justify everything in the story because they're like, well, the character isn't going to buy this. The character isn't going to believe this. I'm like, I
you
don't
will
see
make him believe
the
it.
problem. And they're like, you have to justify this. Um, so there, a lot of justification. There is advanced setup, although you can do it in pieces. It doesn't have to be to the extent of Tolkien by any stretch, because it's really more about capturing that realism than having to have, created languages. Um, one of the things that I've seen as a disadvantage in hard world building is the accidental consistencies that come back to bite you in the butt. Um, where it's like, because you are explaining everything and everything is so clearly delineated, it's easy to forget, even with a good record keeping or a concordance or something that keeps all of your, okay, they use this language for this and currency is like this. It's really easy 2 or 3 books down the road to make a mistake. And, you know, if you have fans who read your stuff and pay attention, somebody's going to point out, well, in book 1, you said.
Which is fun when Sharon Lee and Steve Miller for the Layton universe will actually have scavenger hunts in their
Right,
books.
right.
Like,
They're
Oh,
they're
oh,
that's
leveraging their fan base to.
oh, that's fun.
it's great.
All right.
And I saw
So,
one tweet the other day that I wanted to make sure to mention this in the panel.
uh-huh.
Get the window up. And of course, my computer has now decided it's too long ago. Do I want to bring up that thing? And he was basically using it in reference to Solo, and oh, no, it's already decided it doesn't want to show me. Yeah, boy, it was a great tweet too.
Well, retweet it.
From Dan Hasselforce, explaining every throwaway line and character not only makes the story world smaller, but it also effectively shuts down mystery and the direct appeal to our imagination,
Mm,
which I thought was a really good point because you don't have to explain everything about your world, just
no.
enough to keep your reader interested. So there
Yep.
may be sayings that you just throw in, and you don't have to go back and explain that this came from this part of the history. Like, no, we it's a saying.
Yep. There was a note over on YouTube, which I admit I am not checking quite as regularly because I can't manage, my questions and us. And, so I am checking periodically. But there was a note that hard world building is good when it's time to release a licensed RPG source book. But it's also role playing is actually a place where you're going to use the hard world building. The GM is going to, when they're setting it up, they're going to be doing that's almost always hard world building because the way things like D&D work, you have a magic system, you have everything works in a certain way and follows these rules that you can determine what happens by rolling dice. And so that's very, very much hard world building.
Also, you can't predict where your party will want to go.
Yeah.
And so there's.
You may have everything set up over here, but your party decides they're going to go that way.
I have all the props. So advantage.
That side.
No, don't go that direction. So what are some advantages to soft world building?
I feel like I kind of covered that.
Yeah, leaving the imagination open.
Okay.
Leaving more of the mystery to the world.
Giving yourself options for book 2.
Yeah.
Yep. I think you have more of that creative freedom because the story doesn't constantly have to justify itself to the reader. And the gaps in information and logic let the reader make the story their own. They get to, put their creativity into it and see things with their eyes. And I think it makes the story more flexible and you can focus just on the character or more so on the character than you do with hard world building where your character is moving through this world and you have to keep stopping periodically and saying oh well, we have motorized vehicles here and moving on, and yes, we do have telephone poles.
If you keep skating along fast enough, it's amazing how big a logical gap you can vault over.
But I think you do end up with fewer info dumps, and the expository or introductory part of your story is going to have fewer of those lulls in the setup because you're like, I don't need to set up the whole world. Like, you do not need to. I'm not opening the book and the stage is right there and you can see everything. No, I'm just shining the flashlight in the room and you can just see where the light is landing because that's where the character is and that's all you're seeing, and so that's all I have to give you right now. But disadvantages with soft world building.
Things you forgot to include.
None, I love it.
I think you do run the risk of not putting enough in, and your reader can get lost and not understand the story. If there's not enough of a connection, and you just end up with bad, illogical, and weird in a bad way, because weird can be good, but this would be weird in a bad way, world that the reader can't see themselves in, can't imagine themselves in, wouldn't want to, because it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and they don't care.
And
So,
there's one thing in the chat.
yep. Let's see, subject of hard world building from a game writing perspective is why they're here this evening. Hi, Matt. Hard world building is important, but expressing it to players almost always have to be soft so that they're exploring. Yes,
Mhm.
yes. You're just giving the players just enough to continue on the journey, because otherwise they learn everything and then it's less of an adventure. Um,
And also because in the real world things happen and you don't know why.
Mhm.
And what develops over time is your sense of the consistency of the world, so that you can sort of get an idea what's likely to happen in a given situation, but um, but not seeing all the gears moving behind the scenes,
mhm.
you don't know for sure. But you can get a sense if something is wildly out of kilter.
Mhm.
Elephants cannot fly. We already know that.
Ooh, wolves in the walls. That's a delightful soft world building. Very weird. Wolves just come out of you know,
That happens.
when the wolves come out of the walls, it's all over.
Yeah.
Or elephants.
Mhm.
Um, so what are your thoughts on a combination of hard and soft world building?
That's a logical way to proceed because you don't throw everything up in the air and say, oh, oh just random things happen.
Yeah, that is kind of my approach. I mean, I like I say, I'm trying to do enough work up front
Mhm.
that I'm not going to be striking out into total wilderness and having to make it all up as I go along,
Mhm.
and not having any degree of consistency or unified vision. But on the other hand, within within limits.
Yeah.
And so
I'm not,
that's, yeah, my combination is to do a bunch of reading up front.
mhm.
Mhm.
And like I was saying, with the 1905 thing, newspapers, diaries, get a feel for the language of the time,
Mhm.
what sort of things they were seeing advertised, what they would be talking about at a party. There was a war going on in Japan. And what? There was a war in Japan then?
Mhm.
Um, Sports teams and things like that, just so that I feel like I'm there
Mhm.
and I can start to tell it.
Yeah. So I'm not dropping everything every 5 minutes. Go, oh, I need to research this element of the
Mhm.
story.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And leave a little bracket here for put a fact here.
That's actually if it's something that you don't need to know fully to continue writing, that brackets of, add description of the place here, yeah, keep moving
Yeah.
can be.
That's true. I use the square brackets too. But sometimes you can't, because if the world building is effective, it really has to be driving the story as well. And so you can't just say, make up detail here, because the detail is important to the action.
Mhm.
And so the way I think of it is, it's just like writing and editing. You can't write and edit at the same time, or you bog yourself down. You also can't write and world build at the same time, or you bog yourself down, except for little fun details that you happen to think of as you go along. But the broad outlines have to be there, because that way you can forge ahead and not be pausing every other sentence to say, okay, now why are they doing this? So let's figure out something to make that happen. Because even if it's soft world building, the character story has to be consistent, and the sense of the place has to be consistent. You might not understand the rules, but you need to feel like somewhere behind the scenes there are rules.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that even with soft world building, it's not supposed to imply that, there are no rules, but there's supposed to be, you know, yeah, you're not getting all the rules. You're just getting the pieces. So and have either of you seen the gosh, what is it called? Is it the story triangle? Okay.
Mm.
Let me find my story triangle and I may actually share my screen for that. So it shouldn't take me too long. If I go to the correct place, it won't take me too long. As noted earlier, I am less sharp than
There's
normal.
something that's
I searched
sitting there.
for it in Google, and I'm seeing the corners being exposition, resolution, and climax.
Nope, it's a little bit different
I
triangle.
see.
So
I
hang on.
see.
Graphics.
Storyteller, audience, and story.
Nope, it's not that one either.
There's so many.
Well, and this is, one of the features of any kind of mnemonic or teaching tool that we have out there is that there's going to be variations on it. So hang on, I'm going to share this so you can take a look at it. All right, can you see the triangle?
Uh, well, I can't, but maybe the people on YouTube can.
Checking YouTube to see if they can see it. Whoa. Okay, that's weird looking. All right. Yeah, it's really weirdly. Oh, there we go. Now it looks properly on YouTube. Can you see it now, Tyler, by chance?
I'm not on YouTube. Oh, did we
Oh,
lose Catherine?
Catherine,
Come
Catherine, come
back.
back, come back. So the point behind this particular triangle, I think, speaks to something that you were talking about just a moment ago. So on each point, you have the characters on the top, the plot on the one side, and then the world on the other corner. And on the outside of the triangle, there's some words that and an arrow that relate to the direction that you're going. So the characters carry the plot. The plot depends on the world. The world creates the characters. So that's your outside of the triangle. On the inside of the triangle, welcome back, Catherine. We missed you. On the inside of the triangle, you have the characters are limited by the world. The world is changed by the plot. The plot moves or pushes the characters. I'm going to stop my share because I think that messes with things. But I think it is worth noting that all of the components of the story do feed each other. You can't your characters didn't develop in a vacuum. They are the product of their world. You know, they are created by their environment and influenced by it. So, and the events that happen in a space are going to be influenced by the space that they're in. So if you have a fight scene that's on top of a building, well, does the building have a pitched roof? Is it steeply pitched or is it a flat roof? Does it have a little widow's walk around it and then it's got the mansard roof? Are there gargoyles up there? Are there antennas up there? And all of that will feed how the fight goes if you were to continue having a fight on this roof. And so yeah, there are times when you can't do the brackets, or you might have to do the brackets for an entire scene. Fight scene happens here, and then once you know where it's happening, you can put in all those details without having to come back and massively edit it later to make it fit in the environment that you've put it in. Oh wait, there are no caves in this place, so they can't have a battle in a cave.
We can fix
Well,
that.
there's no lighting fixtures, so they can't be fighting there in the dark.
No, there was no chandelier. You can't be swinging from that. It doesn't exist. Which is a bummer, sadly. I have always wanted to. All right, I've always wanted. I guess when I shared my screen, weird things happened over on YouTube. I apologize. Technology isn't as perfect as we would like it to be.
Yeah.
Does well. All right. Is there anything you feel like we've left out on the concept of hard and soft world building? Things that you want to mention, talk about?
I want to talk some about uh, politics and economics
Hmm.
because every place, even if there's soft world building, I mean, people are motivated by these factors, and it bears thinking about, and it's something that I see a lot of places, a lot of cases, it hasn't really been thought about,
Yeah.
and you come up with settings that have economies that don't really have any way to work.
Hmm.
Um, I I also think it's possible to take a little too much of the real modern world and think you can just change one thing
Yeah.
and and not follow out the repercussions of it. So that's a little too much like lazy soft world building. um, we can travel to other planets, but people are still driving around in cars and living in houses the way they do here. um, no, there's going to be a lot more differences than that. So it's that sort of thing. I mean, it's the things that strike a wrong note, and it's not so much hard versus soft as how much, because that's really about when you do the work.
Mhm.
It's whether you do the work.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So,
Catherine, any things that you want to bring up,
Basically,
mention?
try things and see what works for you because everybody's going to be writing differently. Some people will want to focus on all the details. We've
Hmm.
got a panel tomorrow talking about when to cut out the boring parts.
uh yeah. Another thing that I like to try to bring in is the fact that in real world settings, not everyone agrees
Mhm.
about what's going on.
Yeah.
And so you have I have characters who are arguing about this stuff, and one thinks things work this way and another thinks things work this way, and they both have evidence for their sides, and maybe one of them's right, and maybe they're both somewhat right, and maybe they're both wrong. and and this is the rough and tumble of people living in the world actually works, and I think that adds to the realism as well. And that's something where you have to think of not just one way that it is, but a couple of ways that it could be.
Hmm. Um, your comment on taking the real world and just altering one thing. Um, I think if you just alter one thing, that creates more problems than taking that real world place and making just enough changes that people who are familiar with it will recognize, yes, that's St. Paul, but it's not my St. Paul.
Hmm.
My writers group refers to this as not my beautiful Minnesota. You know, several of us have written stories that take place in not my beautiful St. Paul, where, yeah, I might go and look at some of the places and say, "Ooh, I like Raspberry Island." Raspberry Island shows up in a bunch of my stories. So does Sweet Hollow, two of my favorite places in St. Paul. Um, but there will be things that I change about them, and then everything around Raspberry Island and Sweet Hollow ends up completely different. So it's like, yes, this is St. Paul, but it's an alternate reality of St. Paul. It's not the Mirror Mirror universe because it's not all evil, and I don't have a beard, but it's just enough different that it's not St. Paul. I
So
think
that
that,
people can't complain that you got it wrong because you are
yes,
obviously getting it wrong on purpose, whatever
yes,
kind of mistakes you might have
yeah.
made.
Yep. All right. I'm going to take a quick peek and see if there are any questions over on YouTube. No questions over there. I have no idea if who's in the Zoom and if they have any questions, but I did a really bad job setting this up, and I didn't read the blurb, and I always read the blurb, and I normally
No,
say,
no new
oh, here's when
questions.
you ask questions at any time, and it is so past my bedtime. Um, but okay, so it looks like we've got 4 minutes left, so I'm supposed to. All right, I would not just supposed to, I would like to thank my panelists for joining me this evening. This was really delightful to talk to you both about this. Um, you had a lot of really interesting and neat things to add cool stuff. And I'd like to thank the audience. It's a little hard and a little different when we can't see you, but there have been some comments, so we know that there are some people in the audience, and that's really nice to know. Um, but thank you for joining us today, this evening as well.
Hordes will watch it later.
Yes. Well, are we going to be able to watch it later?
Yeah, it's going to be on YouTube.
Okay, I wasn't sure if they were going to keep the recordings of the streamed panels. That's cool. Because then you can attend all of the panels, even if they were on top of each other. Uh, nice bonus of virtual conventions. So MarsCon is happening online all weekend with events on YouTube, Discord, Twitch, and Zoom. And there are more details to be found on marscon.org. If you haven't been over on the Discord, over in the con suite, people are running virtual puzzles, digital puzzles. And in Krushenko's, I've been running writing sprints. So um, those are good fun. Um, and let's see what else. Oh, let's see. Coming up tomorrow, the three of us plus a couple of other people will also be on a 11:30 panel that Catherine has mentioned, cut the boring parts. So if you enjoyed us this evening, come and hang out with us tomorrow morning and talk about the editing process. It'll
We're
be
going to
great.
finish that panel in like 20 minutes, by the way.
Cut the boring stuff. Cut the fat.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let's see.
What the boring parts are.
Do check out the charity auction. I've gone in and I have several tabs open that I need to address because they're very cool items there. So, and then I guess there are 3 troops selling Girl Scout cookies. So yeah, you can't come around the corner and be assaulted by the Girl Scouts there waiting, waving their cookies, looking all cute in their costumes and Girl Scout uniforms. But they are selling cookies. If they're selling in if you live in the area that they are located in, you can do girl delivery and they will deliver them to you. Otherwise, you can get them shipped. And if you get 6 boxes, shipping is half off. So shipping for 5 boxes is killer, but 6 boxes is not so bad. It's amazing what happens when they half that. And then please do stay healthy. It would be wonderful to see you all in person next year. So thank you all for joining us. Bye.